What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video I'm going to be going through my week 2 tight end start sits. So going through every single week 2 matchup, talking about every single fantasy relevant tight end, and listing them as either a start, fringe option, or a sit. Starts are players that you feel pretty confident throwing into your lineup. Obviously the tight end position is a mess, really rough this week. We had some of the top dogs injured, and then we had a lot of underperforming players. So, start can be used kind of loosely here. You probably don't feel as confident starting some of these guys as you would for the starts in like the wide receiver or the running back videos. Fringe options, these are players where it's like you can throw them into your lineup. It probably means you punted the tight end position. There are going to be a lot of fringe options because despite the tight end position not really paying off for fantasy, there were a lot of players who had really interesting usage in week 1 who I think, could end up emerging as really strong tight end plays throughout the season. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe if you are not already. And then if you have any fantasy questions, drop those down below. Just give me the scoring setting of whatever league you're playing in. But let's jump right into it. Starting off with the Thursday night matchup, we have the Vikings taking on the Eagles. For TJ Hawkinson, the volume was solid in week 1. Didn't necessarily translate to solid fantasy production, but still someone who I'm firing up as a high-end tight end 1. For Dallas Goedert, he completely flopped in week 1. It wasn't a usage issue, which I guess is positive. His routes were still solid. I just think you're going to get a few of these games with Dallas Goedert. Like if you drafted Goedert expecting that he would be like this ultra consistent, high volume tight end, you probably made the wrong pick. He's the third weapon on an offense that's not overly pass heavy. He's on a strong offense, which can give him some touchdown upside, but I think he's just more of a weekly back end tight end 1. So I think he's someone you start. He's better than a lot of other options out there, but he's definitely not someone that you should be like expecting elite production from week after week. But obviously you're expecting more than than nothing he gave you in week 1. Moving over to the Packers-Falcons matchup, I have the Packers' Luke Musgrave listed as a fringe option. In his first game of his NFL career, had a 77% route participation. He actually led this team in routes, which is pretty impressive. Targeted 4 times, caught 3 of them for 50 yards. Almost got into the end zone, was tackled I think on the 5. He had to fall down to get the ball, but he was completely wide open. So I think Musgrave is someone who's going to become more and more interesting throughout the season, but I think as early as here in week 2, he is someone who technically could be thrown into your lineup. You probably don't feel great about it, but I do think he is startable. And then for the Falcons, I'm going to go with Kyle Pitts as a start here, and I can already feel people not liking this listing here. I know people really, aren't huge fans of Kyle Pitts. They probably think he should be a fringe option or even a sit. But just hear me out here with my argument on Kyle Pitts. Obviously, it's a weak position, which kind of factors in here. But last season for Kyle Pitts, he completely flopped. He was very disappointing, and he had a few key problems that kind of led to that. The first one was that his quarterback play was terrible. Marcus Mariota was definitely not it, and he was bad in general, but he was especially bad when targeting Kyle Pitts, so that definitely held him back. The overall passing volume was really poor last year for the Falcons. They were super run heavy. And then also his route participation wasn't that great. It's not like the pass attempts were super low and he was, in on pretty much every route. He was in on 3/4 of the routes, which is fine, but not in a low volume passing attack. So now shift over to 2023. The quarterback question is still up in the air, but I don't think it can get worse than Marcus Mariota. Desmond Ridder seemed fine here in week 1. Obviously, he didn't throw it a ton. The passing volume is still going to be a concern. We just got to accept that. They're going to be a low volume passing attack, but it's not going to be 18 pass attempts every single week. That's just impossible. They're probably going to be somewhere between the 25 to 30 pass attempt per game number when we're looking back at it. So that's something we're just going to have to deal with here. But I think what was really positive for Kyle Pitts was that his route participation was really strong. He had a 91% route participation. He ran 20 routes on 22 dropbacks. That is great usage at the tight end position. And then I just think when we're looking at these tight ends who, are not locked in to be the top 4 or 5 tight ends, the talent and big playability of Kyle Pitts, I think, just elevates him above a lot of the other players in the fringe tier. A lot of these guys in the fringe tier, you're hoping they go 4 for 40 and score a touchdown. Kyle Pitts has elite upside week to week. Obviously the volume's not going to be there consistently, but I still think he's someone who's regarded as a back end start. And I just think we need to see a game with high volume, because then I think we'll start to see people really come around on Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and not even like high volume, like 40 pass attempts. I'm talking like 30 pass attempts, which is not crazy for an NFL team. Want to see one of those games, and then I think these guys can kind of start impressing from this Falcons, target room. In the next matchup, we have the Raiders taking on the Bills. The Raiders are pretty much rolling out a tight end committee here with Austin Hooper and Michael Mayer. Completely uninterested in both of those guys. For the Bills, I think the usage was pretty promising, honestly, for both Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. Kincaid had a 76% route participation in week 1. Dawson Knox ran just one more route than him. So they were on the field together a ton. I mean, pretty much 3/4 of the game. And from week 1, that is a very strong starting point for Dalton Kincaid to have. I'd like to see him used a little bit more down the field. He was used kind of a low A-dot option. I do think he has the ability to stretch the field, especially at his size. He is that kind of athlete, especially when he's playing out wide. But worst case scenario, he's going to be a guy who has touchdown upside in one of the better offenses in the NFL. And I think he's just going to continue to build throughout the season. Not saying his route participation is going to get much higher, but I think this is a very solid number to start off on. And I think he will be a solid option moving forward. In the next game, we have the Ravens taking on the Bengals. I'd be expecting Mark Andrews to make his season debut here in week 2. If he's playing, you're obviously firing up as a start. Isaiah Likely, he's someone I actually threw into at least one of my lineups last week. With Mark Andrews being out, he completely flopped. It happens. If Andrews misses again, we'll just kind of have to reevaluate and see what that looks like. For the Bengals, I have Irv Smith listed as a fringe option. None of these Bengals really got to show out just with how little passing volume there was, or at least passing yardage. Only 82 passing yards for Joe Burrow. But Irv Smith was targeted 5 times, caught 3 of them for 17 yards. He had a 71% route participation, which is solid. But he's probably just going to be one of these guys who has week-to-week touchdown upside on a top offense and is running a decent number of routes. So it'll be interesting to see if that kind of sticks heading into week 2. But I do think he'll be a fringe play at the tight end position. In the next game, we have the Seahawks taking on the Lions. Seahawks are running a tight end by committee. It's unfortunate because I feel like Noah Fant does have some talent as a player, but he is definitely going to be a sit. And then for the Lions, I have Sam Laporta listed as a fringe option. He had 5 receptions for 39 yards, 72% route participation in his first NFL game, 17.2% target share. That's all pretty solid for his NFL debut, like I mentioned. So I think Sam Laporta is definitely someone to keep an eye on, and is probably week to week like a high-end tight end too, at least at this point. Moving over to the Colts Texans matchup. For the Colts, Kylan Granson actually had a pretty solid game, but he's not someone I want to rely on week to week. They're going to filter in these tight ends. Got Jelani Woods on IR. He would be the guy I'd probably be most interested in, but at this point, just fading that tight end room. And then for the Texans here, I know a lot of people really liked Dalton Schultz as like a late round tight end, and he didn't really do a ton in week 1. I have him listed as a fringe option. He had a very, very strong route participation. He had a 91% route participation. He was only able to command 4 targets, which was like a 9% target share, so that was poor. But if you're running that high percentage of routes, you're going to become somewhat relevant, especially at the tight end position. Even if it's like a high-end tight end 2, I definitely think he kind of belongs in that area. Now we've got the Chiefs taking on the Jaguars. Just like how Mark Andrews missed week 1, same thing with Travis Kelce. I'd be expecting him to return here in week 2. And if Travis Kelce's playing, he's obviously going to be a start in your lineup. And then for the Jaguars, Evan Ingram, really solid usage. Nice week 1 performance. If a tight end can get you around the 10 point per game number, PPR point per game number, without getting to the end zone, I feel like that's an overall pretty solid day. That's what Ingram did, so I like him as a start in this matchup. Then we have the Bears taking on the Buccaneers. And looking at Cole Kmet, he played a very significant role in this offense, had a 94% route participation, targeted 7 times, 5 receptions for 44 yards. So overall, a strong week 1. We're going to need to see this Bears offense kind of get it together before I can list him as a start. But if they start to click and Cole Kmet keeps this usage, he is someone who will probably be someone you feel confident starting in the future if they can get it together. On the other side with the Bucs, just not really interested in what they have here, so going to be sitting Cade Otton. Moving over to the Chargers-Titans matchup, Gerald Everett was someone who was potentially like, you could slide him in during bye weeks or if you punted the position. It doesn't seem like that is going to be the case this year. They've kind of gone to a tight end by committee with Gerald Everett and Donald Parham Jr., so both those dudes are going to be sits for me. On the other side with Chigo Okonkwo, despite having 0 receptions in week 1, I do have him listed as a fringe option. His usage was pretty encouraging. In 2022, Okonkwo didn't get over a 50% route participation. He was crazy efficient on his opportunities. His target rate was great. Yards per reception, yards per route run. All of those metrics were super strong. He just wasn't getting on the field a ton. That route participation went all the way up to 75% in week 1. So that type of usage, if he can blend it with the efficiency he saw last year, definitely someone to kind of look out for. Moving over to the Giants-Cardinals matchup, I'm very high on Darren Waller. He was operating as like their leading pass catcher in week 1, even though it was just an overall terrible game from that offense. Not overly concerned moving forward. I think he will be their number 1 target, and I think he is a very strong start here in week 2. On the other side with the Cardinals, Zach Ertz had great usage coming off of his, I think it was an ACL tear. 91% route participation. He led the team with 9 targets, 6 receptions for 21 yards. Obviously, if you have 9 targets and that turns into 6 for 21, you're probably not feeling great about it, but it's kind of what's just going to happen here on this Cardinals offense and Zach Ertz kind of later on in his career. So if he had that usage on a better offense, he'd probably be listed as a start, but the Cardinals really just kind of limit these guys' ceilings, so he will be a fringe option. In the next game, we have the 49ers taking on the Rams. George Kittle didn't do anything crazy in week 1, but that's kind of comes with the territory. You have a lot of mouths to feed. Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, CMC. George Kittle is going to have a few boom games. Wasn't super high on him coming into the season, but I still think he's someone who's a weekly start. Like if you drafted him, you spent that premium capital, you got to have him in the lineup because you can't miss out on those boom opportunities. On the other side with the Rams, Tyler Higbee had a pretty quiet week 1 in terms of his targets, only drew 3 of them, but he had an 85% route participation. I wouldn't be surprised if he was more involved here in week 2. Switching over to the Jets-Cowboys matchup, I have both of these guys listed as sits here. Tyler Conklin, really, without Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson is the only pass catcher we have any sort of trust in moving forward, so Conklin's definitely a sit. Jake Ferguson was someone who I was pretty interested in kind of seeing what his role was heading into week 1. He commanded 7 targets, which was very impressive, but he only had a 54% route participation, and it's not like he made the most of those 7 targets. Seemed like him and Dak were a little bit out of sync. If that route participation grows, he becomes interesting, but I can't rationalize starting a tight end who's, pretty much only running routes on like half of the dropbacks. Next up is going to be the Commanders taking on the Broncos, and for the Commanders, I have Logan Thomas as a fringe option. It seems like he always just makes himself somewhat relevant at the tight end position. You never feel great starting him, but you can kind of throw him in there. 76% route participation. He actually tied for the team lead with 7 targets, a 24% target share. I don't think he's going to see that type of volume week after week, but if that route participation stays the same, he is someone who's at least a little bit interesting. For the Broncos, very sad we saw Greg Dulcich go down kind of early in the game. I thought this could have been his opportunity to break out, with Jerry Jeudy out, limited wide receiver weapons, didn't happen. Not overly interested here in Adam Troutman moving forward, so he is going to be a sit. Then we have a divisional game between the Dolphins and the Patriots. Starting off here with the Dolphins, I was not expecting to be listing Durham Smythe as a fringe option heading into week 2, but that's where we're at. 80% route participation, 7 targets, which was second most on the team, 3 receptions for 44 yards. If he's getting that type of usage on this offense, that is going to be a very valuable role moving forward, especially with how they looked in week 1. So definitely someone to keep your eye on. I feel like a lot of people probably aren't going to be like super hip to his usage. They might just think he kind of lucked into a few targets here or there. Definitely someone to keep your eye on. On the other side with the Patriots and Hunter Henry, 72% route participation, which is solid. I don't think it's great. Like, that's not going to have me lunge him into like a, clear start just because that's not elite usage. but 6 targets, 5 receptions, 56 yards, and a touchdown. He was actually the highest scoring week 1 tight end. I obviously don't think the Patriots are going to have that crazy high passing volume, like 50 plus pass attempts per game. But I mean, Hunter Henry is clearly going to be a factor in this offense moving forward. And Mike Gesicki really didn't eat into his opportunities a ton. You'd like to see him, if you wanted him to be a consistent starter, be like 80+% raw participation. But, you kind of take what you can get at the tight end spot. Moving over to the first Monday night game, we have the Saints taking on the Panthers. I have both of these guys listed as fringe plays. Kind of a quiet game from Juwan Johnson, 3 for 36, but he had an 84% raw participation, which is really strong. That sticks. He's definitely going to have some better games ahead. Then we have Hayden Hurst. He led the Panthers with 7 targets, turned that into 5 for 41 and a touchdown. 64% raw participation, not ideal. Maybe he builds on that heading into week 2, considering there's not a ton of great weapons on this team. He's one of the only guys that kind of found some success and some chemistry with Bryce Young. So we'll see. Hopefully he can build on it. But right now, people may see that stat line, want to lock him into your starting lineup. I do think he's playable, but not someone who I'm like overly excited about locking in there. And then the final game of the week, another kind of a dual fringe matchup here. Browns taking on the Steelers. So for David Njoku, he had a 74% raw participation, which is fine. For him to really hit a ceiling, you would have liked to see that number be higher. I just want to see a strong Deshaun Watson passing game before I feel overly confident in Njoku. Like, I think if Deshaun Watson returns to pre-suspension form, then that 74% raw participation is fine, and could make him very interesting for fantasy. But if Deshaun Watson is the same guy we saw last year, and Njoku's in on 74% of the routes, that's not really something I'm overly excited about for fantasy. And then the final player here, Pat Freiermuth. If he was 100% healthy and we knew he'd have 100% of his role, then he'd definitely be a start for me. He had an 82% raw participation in the first half, very strong, but he suffered a chest injury during that week 1 game and then was kind of in and out of the lineup, limited for the rest of the game. So we'll see how that injury kind of tracks throughout this week. But if he's healthy, good to go, I would actually consider him someone that I would rely on, especially with Deontay likely missing this game. I think Freiermuth is in store for a decent amount of volume. That is going to wrap it up for every single week 2 matchup, all 16 games, every fantasy relevant tight end. If you all have any questions, you can drop those down below. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. Go check out all my other start sit videos if you haven't seen them already. Running backs, wide receivers, and quarterbacks are all up. So thank you all again for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.